Heavenly Father, Lord God, we are so grateful to you for the opportunity to come and have a conversation, one that is of great importance, because so many of us are just weighed down and just feeling overwhelmed, feeling tired, feeling burnt out. And Lord, we are just in need of your guidance and your understanding in how to move concerning our mental health. And so we ask, Lord, that you be in the midst of our conversation and that you bless our guest. It's in Jesus' name I pray this. Amen. Good morning and welcome to another episode of What's the Message? I am your host, Claudia Allen, and I am so excited to be back with you for another week, another important conversation. This is What's the Message? Carmela, how are you doing? It is good to see you. I know you were on the road this week. You had so many different things going on. How are you feeling?
Oh my goodness, I got a lot going on. I told somebody this morning, I had my camera off at an earlier morning Zoom meeting. I'm like, I have the travel hangover, okay? I've been everywhere. Had to pick up our kids from college, had to hit a graduation. I'm gonna tell you we don't ever do praise reports, but I just have to say this honestly.
Please.
We were going across the bridge from Arkansas to Tennessee, across the Mississippi River. And you know that we've been working on a documentary for Message. And so I wanted to go down there and I wanted to be on the Mississippi River. We went across this bridge and I heard after we went across the bridge, they closed the bridge because someone discovered a crack in the truss of the bridge. Okay. They closed traffic on the bridge and the boat traffic under the bridge. And I'm just saying right here and now, glory, hallelujah, I was not a part of a horror film. Okay.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
all I'm trying to say.
Yes.
That was crazy. It was crazy,
Yeah.
but all is well, all is good. And I'm so excited for our guest today.
Absolutely. I think that, Black mental health in particular is a critical conversation. And I know I've tried to get this guest on in the past, and she is so busy because she is literally the Black woman in charge. And so it is just truly a pleasure to have Dr. Seanna-Kaye Denham-Wilks in the building on the podcast this morning. Dr. Wilks is an advanced practice clinical psychologist and internationally recognized inspirational speaker who specializes in emotional well-being, healing from trauma, and the treatment of depression and anxiety. Currently, she is also the care experience officer of one of the nation's largest level 1 trauma hospitals, where she directs the patient experience strategy and oversees workforce engagement activities around joy in work. Dr. Denham received her doctorate in psychology from St. John's University and completed her internship training at the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey. She holds positions as an adjunct professor in psychology at St. John's University and a clinical instructor for the Child Psychiatry Fellowship at SUNY Downstate Medical School. Dr. Denham-Wilks is married to Pastor Courtney Wilks, and they are the proud parents of their son, Caleb. Dr. Denham-Wilks, welcome to the podcast. Me and Carmela, we got things that we need to talk about.
Okay. You are so in for it today. I mean, we're going to be trying to squeeze all kind of free therapy and insights. I hope you're ready. Okay.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And Claudia, I'm glad that we didn't give up until we had today.
Absolutely. Yes. No. Because, like I was saying to you in the break room, I just feel like, particularly within COVID, so many of us have had I feel like more work now that we're home.
Mm-hmm.
And people are really trying to navigate, how do I work? How do I parent? How do I maintain my sanity? You know, a very good friend of mine just this week, you know, had a conflict with work, and she's pregnant and has a 1-year-old. And so, you know, really just trying to, and she also works in mental health. And so it's like, how can I, even almost as a mental health worker, find the balance between my own sanity, between the work demands and parenting and all of the needs that my children have that I can and cannot always make. I don't know. I just feel like my anxiety is through the roof during this time.
I tell you, it's really exposed what it is people think about home versus work, right? And what people think happens at home and what happens at work. And also has really exposed how much lack of disconnect we have between those two spheres, right? So I think that we really do have an opportunity to challenge our thinking around what happens when you have to take care of multiple responsibilities at the same time, and your usual resources for doing that are unavailable because of prevailing global conditions. I don't think many of us have had an experience like this, where we have had our schemas and our predetermined notions completely taken away from us and made vulnerable by external forces beyond our control. So everyone's looking for that little bit of locus of control that they do have in order to impose some structure, because without that predictability of life, anxiety, depression, and moving back and forth between mood states is going to be the experience of many, many people. And certainly we've seen that. Now, there are people who have had this experience, right? Where you've been living in situations where your life has been disrupted by natural disasters, by widespread illness, or even by war or significant issues like that. So there are people who have had that experience that maybe others of us haven't, because of, you know, where we live, haven't had that experience. And there are people who are in those situations and also experiencing the pandemic. So we've got to give ourselves a lot of grace for where we are.
Yeah. So to that, why is it then that it seems like people are experiencing all those things? You're in these circumstances that you cannot control. There are a variety of external and internal factors that are almost kind of moving together like a tornado effect. Why then are people so adverse to therapy?
Well, I think that goes back a long way, and then also just kind of human nature, right? So the vulnerability that it takes to be in therapy is something that is not an easy thing for people to do, for them to open up to somebody else. And the therapeutic relationship is very different from other relationships where there's a different kind of reciprocity, right? Because you can't come to me as a therapist and say to me, well, you know, so what's going on in your life? How are you handling the stress and all of that, right? It's this very unusual interaction where the focus is on doing the work, but it often feels unidirectional, because there is that boundary between the patient or the client, however, whatever setting you're in therapeutically, and the therapist, that says that you're going to entrust with me a lot of information that you don't even speak to yourself, right? And you're not going to get that back from me. So it really lays the person very vulnerable. Therapy is not easy, but effective therapy is extremely effective.
So why do you make that caveat, effective therapy? How is there then ineffective therapy?
Right, because I am loving the fact that more people are talking about therapy. Stigmas are being punched down. People are, searching through their insurance provider and getting referrals from friends. I love that, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's very important for people to know how to select a therapist. And I don't think that that's widely known. And
Okay.
then every therapist is not necessarily going to be the right fit for what it is that you need in the therapeutic relationship. And it's multifactorial, multi-determined. And so a lot of times I see people saying, I want a therapist who is this, and that, rather
Mhm.
than a therapist who knows this, then this, and that. Right. And I think that
Mm.
that's really where we have some more work to do as a profession to really help people to understand that therapists have specific training, they have specific theoretical frameworks that they work from, they have specific lengths of experience. There are generalists and there are specialists, just like with other aspects of our healthcare, right? So you wouldn't go to the dermatologist for a cardiac issue, right?
Yeah.
And you shouldn't go to your primary care physician for a psychiatric issue.
Mhm.
So all of those things need to be taken into account. It's great that people are moving more and more to wanting to go to therapy, but you really have to seek that alignment.
Mm.
Mm.
You know, what you said just, I hadn't intended to ask this question, but I'm gonna ask it since you mentioned it. It seems to me Black people have a unique experience here in America. And it seems to me a lot of our lived experiences have a obviously a tie to the racial dynamics and context. So don't I want a Black therapist?
That is an excellent question. So if similarity in racial or ethnic background was sufficient, then I think that we would be in big trouble because the number of Black therapists in any region of the United States of America, in terms of supply, is far outstripped by the demand.
Mhm.
The profession of psychotherapy was traditionally a very male sphere in terms of who were the practitioners, right?
Oh, wow.
Historically speaking. And then, you know, when you look at the history, you even see that we still have a lot of work within the profession to really come to a reckoning about how the profession was established in the first place. Many, not to say that there wasn't the presence of women in psychotherapy spheres, but often their work was credited to men, and often they didn't have an equitable training opportunity as well as experience. And then when you look at, you know, the number of people of color, just generally speaking, who are in the profession has a long way to go. And when I say profession, I'm broadly speaking, because there are different types of degrees that allow one to be a therapist, right? So I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, and I have a specialization in acute care and marital and family work. So I work a lot with families and subsets around that. So whether it's children, adolescents, couples, parents, all the different dynamics within a family, that's primarily, and I tend to work with people who have significant psychiatric concerns, right? So my training is, and my licensure is specific to that. But you could be a licensed clinical social worker. You could be a psychiatrist who prescribes the medication and also has additional training in psychotherapy. You could be, you could have an MFT degree. So there are a lot of degrees that come under the profession of therapy. And it's something to keep in mind as well. So the profession over time has opened up more to women in the profession and also people of color. But in every degree that's associated with therapy, the number of practitioners of color the percentages are really small.
So what I'm hearing you say is due to the supply or due to the market, you might not be able to find someone who fits your exact demographic, but don't wait if you can. Is that what I'm hearing you say? That's the
Exactly.
implication. All right.
Right. So there are other factors you may want to consider, right?
Mhm.
So if your preference is for a clinician of color, absolutely seek that. But even if you're looking at the pool of available clinicians of color, you do want to consider training, you do want to consider specialization, you do want to ask questions about whether or not they've had experience with the particular issue that you are looking to have therapeutic services for.
Mhm.
You want to look to see if their licensure is in good and regular standing. If they're licensed, that's another thing as well. The licensed therapist has a professional association that they're accountable to for the work that they do. So you
Right.
want to make sure that that person has those minimal credentials. And if you begin the work with that therapist and it's going well, you don't have to like how it's going, but it's going well. Because remember, the work of therapy is very challenging because it relies on your ability to be vulnerable around the things that are impacting you and others. So you may not like how it feels,
Mhm.
but if it is effective, you continue. And then if it's not, you may have to reassess. I think also people need to be willing to say to the therapist, this isn't working. Can we talk about that? If
How
it,
do you know if it's working? I'm sorry, Claudia, did I cut you off? I mean, that's my whole thing. It's like, what are some of the things that, will let you know that you're making progress? How are you going to feel? How are you going to do, I guess, some of the behavior and some of your just lifestyle interactions? What are you going to see differently?
and this is where we talk about the difference between your good girlfriend who gives great advice as
Mhm.
opposed to the therapist, right? So, I think that that's another thing that would be great for people to understand is how it's different from just, downloading what's going on in your life to someone who you trust. So, a therapist should be working from a thorough clinical assessment that proceeds over several sessions. They should be working from that assessment should inform a treatment plan that has specific goals and specific objectives. Those objectives should be SMARTY goals, right? So they should be specific,
Mhm.
measurable, they should be appropriate, reasonable, time-based, and they should be inclusive and equitable. So if your therapist works from a formulation that does not include us considering, well, what is it we're actually working on? You might need to clarify those things with your
Mhm.
therapist, but there should be an assessment, a treatment plan with goals and measurable objectives that have some way of knowing whether you're approaching the goal
Mhm.
or not. And there should be opportunity during the work with a therapist to evaluate how you're moving along that. Imagine going to the doctor, right, to do your annual physical. What already are you anticipating will occur during that session? You're going to get your vitals taken. There may
Yeah.
be some blood work. There
Mhm.
may be some discussion about your health, and then maybe setting of goals based on knowing your numbers, right? So you know your BMI, you know your blood pressure, you know your heart rate, your whether or not your A1C, all those things, right? And if
Right.
your A1C is moving in the wrong direction, you and your doctor are going to set some goals. The same thing with therapy. You need to know your mental health numbers. Where are you on the spectrum of anxiety, of depression? How are the things that are affecting you emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally impacting other aspects of life? How are you showing up in the world? And
Mhm.
is that moving in the right direction or not? And what's the plan and the time frame?
May I ask a
That
question?
Go ahead,
Um,
Robert.
you mentioned like if I have to go to the doctor for a broken arm, I
Mhm.
know the arm is broken.
Right.
I know how it is when it's healed.
Mhm.
But mentally, I've always wondered, if I'm not thinking properly, how can I know I'm not thinking properly, since it's the thought process that determines whether I'm thinking properly or not? How do I know when I'm broken?
I think that's a great question. And it speaks to the fact that we don't talk enough about mental wellness to understand when we're not in that sphere, right? So what is mental health, right? What do you experience when you're in good mental health? And then I think that that's when, if we know what mental health looks like for you, and generally speaking, then we can start to determine when things may be moving in a direction where you may need some additional support, like therapy. Some of the things that a therapist will want to know is how you're sleeping, how you're eating, how you're able to manage your required activities that are making up your life. Is there anything that is keeping you from managing your life in a healthy way? The thoughts that you're thinking, do they lead you to thoughts that may be harmful to yourself or to others? Those kinds of things help us to understand whether or not there's an aspect of your mental health that may need specific treatment, specific relearning, specific unpacking, and specific coping skills. So those are some of the things that the assessment will help you to determine. Now, I believe that just like everybody has an annual physical and everyone has a primary care doctor or knows who need one, I believe that everybody should have therapy at some point in their life. I don't know if it's a professional bias, but I believe that even if you're functioning pretty well, that being able to meet with a therapist for a time limited amount of time to just, get that assessment, how am I doing, would benefit many people.
No, I think that's so great. One of the ways that I came to the realization that I was broken at a particular period in my life was I had a lot of friends who were looking at me when I was unable to see me. And so I think sometimes, we have to be willing to receive what those closest to us are saying about us. And when they are coming to you and saying, hey, Claudia, you need to go to therapy. Hey, Claudia, you need to go to therapy. Hey, Claudia, you need to go to therapy. They're not saying it because they like to hear their own voice, and it was fascinating. I think that for me, it was late. When was this? This was November 2017. I was driving to church. I had just taught a class, 2 sessions of a course. And I was going to this church for this Friday evening program. The class was great. Everything, the students, everything went well. It was fantastic. Everything's good to go. The moment I got home, I was weeping and I couldn't figure out why I was weeping. And I was weeping for like 3-4 hours straight. And I still had to go to this Friday evening program. So I get in the car, I go to this Friday evening program, I put Lecrae on. So I stop it enough to where I'm good to go, or at least I think I'm good to go. Now I'm listening to gospel rap, guys. Okay. I am weeping to the gospel rap like this is Todd Galbert. Okay. Like you would think this is somebody's favorite worship album, and I am weeping to Lecrae's lyrics. And the moment that I got to the church, again, I think I put myself together, right? And a close friend of mine who works in mental health was like, oh, no, no, you're not okay. We're going to revisit this when I finish doing what I got to do. And it was at that moment that I realized, okay, Claudia, like I think that all of us have a variety of coping mechanisms or practices that we do where we're trying to just get by or trying to continue to function. And I think it's a matter of being willing to be honest with yourself and say, am I just continuing to compartmentalize? Am I ignoring some things? Because like that's a telltale sign, Robert. You know, it's like I feel like there are things that happen in our lives all the time that let us know that we're broken. And I think that we just have a tendency to ignore them and just keep working or just keep moving because we either feel like we can't address it or we don't have the time to address it or I don't have the money to go talk to somebody to address it. So I'm just going to ignore what's clearly happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of messaging around being able to do that, to be able to function regardless of how you're feeling. I think that messaging goes deep, especially in communities of color, to, soldier on and be strong and persevere. And Black people are so resilient and, all of that. And, use all your gifts, and to whom much is given, much is required, which is Bible, but it's a lot. Yeah. So I think that also is something that we have to really look at in our communities of color and provide space for people to be able to deal with what they're going through, because all of what we're going through has to go somewhere. And if it's not going out in terms of the therapeutic dialogue and it's in, then you're holding it in your body, right? Those backaches, those cardiac issues, those migraine headaches, those, all of those things, you can take the medication and it goes away for the time, then it returns, but your body remembers and it's holding on to it if it's not going where it needs to go. And so as you, superficially treat, and it keeps recurring, that's also a way to say, is this something that may have a different root? Because if you're treating the wrong root cause, the issue is going to return again.
So do you feel like Christian therapy works? Because I guess the thing that comes to my mind with it is like, should one be seeking out that kind of very scientific, purely clinical, they're going to give me the assessment, give me the breakdowns and my SMARTY goals and all of this, and kind of steer clear from, the kind of Christian, very preachy, inspirational kind of therapy?
Well, I think that, again, when we talk about effective therapy being effective, we really have to assess because faith-based and Christian therapy at its fundamental structure should still have those same components, right? What might be different is your therapist may pray with you, and that is not likely to happen in traditional psychotherapy. Your goals you may be more openly discussing certain treatment plans that include faith-based objectives and faith-based goals. But the fundamentals of what makes therapy effective should be visible regardless of the theoretical background of the therapist. Mm-hmm. So faith-based therapy should include those same things that I talked about earlier and can absolutely be effective. Now, the Bible speaks about, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The Bible speaks about, out of the desires of the mouth, the heart, the mouth speaks. And that very much is in alignment with a lot of traditional psychotherapy that speaks about the connection between what we say to ourselves and how we feel and what we do. So effective psychotherapy looks at those components. How it's framed might be different between a cognitive behavioral therapist, a faith-based therapist, a psychodynamic therapist, and the various other kinds of therapy along the spectrum. But it is really concerned with patterns, how it impacts life, how it impacts goals, how to cope with those things, and the interaction between what's happening between the emotions, the thoughts, and the actions that ensue.
That's great.
So I absolutely think if people want to pursue faith-based therapy, that they should. Again, you have the supply and demand issue, but I think, and then not only you have the supply and demand issue when you're looking for a very specific kind of therapy, but also access and affordability are huge issues, especially for a lot of communities of color where your options are even further limited by how the pay structure of the therapy could proceed. So there's that as well. A lot of therapists don't accept insurance and are out of network. So there's that component as well.
Dr. Wilks, I'd love to, maybe this is shifting gears a little bit, to talk about young people. Our young people, our teenagers. I know that is one of your specialties. And in particular, I was looking at the mental health national .org website, and they're talking about Black people, and in particular, our, what the prevalence of the rates of mental illness and some of the things. And one thing that I saw, and because I have a particular interest in it, is this one statistic that said Black and African Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide at all ages. However, Black and African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. So it's 9.8% versus 6.1%. This is taken from 2018 studies. And I guess that is surprising in some way, but we do know in the last few years, we've seen some of those indicators kind of even out where, white teenagers were experiencing them at higher rates, but now Black teenagers are catching up, unfortunately. Can you just lay the table? Talk to us about our young people. What is it that they're dealing with specifically? And I would love some free advice. How are we dealing with our young people who have depressive symptoms, anxiety, all that sort of thing?
I think that's very telling, that we have to be careful in communities of color to not let our own biases impact the help-seeking behavior of young people, because I think there's certain things that we joke about. Black people, we don't do that, right? And tell me you're a Black person who goes to church without, in a meme or, that kind of stuff. And we have some generally accepted stereotypes, and we laugh and we joke about that in the comments. And I think that is, it's all in good fun, but we need to be mindful. So these statistics move us away from the bias that we may have that says, Black kids don't commit suicide. That's a white people thing. So that's definitely something that we have to move away from. The incidence of suicide, especially amongst young people, are alarming here in the United States. So part of the issue is help-seeking behavior in communities of color. So are we looking at those early warning signs, and then are we making the appropriate calls and getting the appropriate help early on? Have we made in our households the clear messaging that, whatever help that you need for whatever you're going through, this household is going to make sure that you have it? And are we speaking in a way that allows our young people, are we listening in a way that allows our young people to speak? And are we speaking in a way that allows our young people to listen? So these are very painting in broad strokes, but very important topics that I hope that households will start to have more conversations around. Oftentimes, and it could be a combination of things, stigma about mental health services, and also mistrust of the healthcare system that underlies the way that help-seeking behaviors in communities of color may result in delays in seeking help until situations and circumstances have become critical, right? And we don't want to hear about medications to help with mental health issues because we're concerned that our young people are going to be overly medicated. But when the school said to you, there's a problem, something is going on, we think your young person may need to be evaluated, but you don't want any labels on your child. And so you don't follow up with the evaluation, and things progress and progress. And what started out as an issue that was concerning, but of a different magnitude, persists and gets more pervasive. And and leads to something of a different severity, then I think that we really have to look at the way help-seeking behaviors are affirmed in households of color, so that our young people can speak more to their emotional wellness. And this is another reason why, as parents also, we need to look at our own mental health and our own mental wellness, because a lot of young people now are speaking more the language of their emotions and their feelings and behavior. You know, a lot of people are saying, I have anxiety. You know, a lot of people are saying I'm depressed. But if they're saying it in households where the previous generation that they're being parented by is not comfortable with how to have those discussions, then that can lead to situations where our young people seek options to deal with their issues in ways that may not be healthy. So we really want to make sure that our families are really focused on how to deal with emotional content, making sure that parents are taking care of their own emotional wellness so that they're able to create that environment. And then just the way everyone knows basic CPR for physiological concerns, our families really need to know basic mental health first aid so that we're able to not be afraid when we see signs and symptoms, but we know how to respond so that we can respond in a timely and appropriate manner.
Can I just ask for very quickly, if you would unpack, and I see someone in the comments is asking for resources that you would recommend, and I'm going to come back to that. But two things that you just said that I sure wouldn't mind if you would give us a brief, quick tip. One, help-seeking behavior. I'm assuming, like you said, if somebody says, you know, I have anxiety or I'm depressed, that's part of it. But maybe there's some other things that I don't know that you could tell us about. And then the other one, can you tell us a little bit about mental health first aid?
Sure. So in terms of help-seeking behavior, you're right. It may not be as obvious as someone articulating it that well, because sometimes they're not even sure what's going on to be able to put a name to it. But a lot of times that kid who you say, oh, you know, they don't have any behavior, right? Maybe acting in a way to try to signal what is going on with them that they aren't able to manage based on where they are developmentally or just based on their own coping skills, right? So help-seeking behavior can look like that. Help-seeking behavior can also look like, you know, things that people are posting as their statuses on social media, right? That may be a reason for concern as well. Sometimes the gestures that are so scary can be help-seeking behavior, such as non-suicidal, self-injurious behavior, which could look like cutting, which could look like, you know, engaging in things that are scary but are not intended. The person isn't intending to end their life. So unsafe behavior with drugs or alcohol, or even, you know, beyond the typical adventurous kid stuff, but maybe doing things that often result in an accident, or also often result in getting the community engaged around them. You know, not coming home for curfew, and next thing you know, there's a Amber Alert out for this young person who's gone missing. Have you noticed that the numbers of those is also increasing as well, right? So when people don't feel safe, they act in ways that may signal that they need help. So it's paying attention. It's knowing your person. It's knowing your spouse. It's knowing your child. It's knowing the people in your lives that you're close to. And when you're seeing behavior that's concerning and isn't often articulated, it may be that the person is that cry for help that people talk about, but they aren't able to articulate it, right? So it's paying close attention and just checking in. Is everything okay? You know, how are you feeling? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? People who are sleeping less, sleeping more. Now, everybody's sleep habits changed during the pandemic, right? So you have to be mindful of this too, that the unusual circumstances may be impacting what you're seeing, but that doesn't mean it's not help-seeking behavior. So also in terms of mental health first aid, when we think about CPR and basic CPR, right, we're talking about a change in status a change in someone's ability to breathe, that results in them needing emergent help. So mental health first aid is talking about, how do you respond when someone has a change in status, whether it's their thinking is becoming disordered or concerning. They are eating way more than they usually do, or not eating at all. And it's going on for a little while. Usually that time frame we're concerned about is about 2 weeks, where they're sleeping way more, or sleeping a lot less. So the same concerns that cause us to wonder if we need additional help, those are things that we need to look for. And then we need to be able to assess our own ability to respond. I am required to complete advanced life-saving support training periodically, but I do not respond to the codes that happen in the hospital where I work on a regular basis. So if someone has a cardiac emergency, for me to think that my periodic training is going to be sufficient in order to save their life is really being grandiose. So I'm going to do what I can to get the appropriate help there as quickly as possible and make sure that I maintain visual on the person and able to assist as I'm able. The same thing with mental health first aid. You have to know yourself. So if you are setting up around the clock deaconess support for the person to be at their bedside, you have gone a bridge too far. Because if someone requires 24-hour supervision, they need to be at a place where 24-hour supervision is the job of the people who work there, right? So we need to make sure that we get the help that we need while we support the person until they are where they need to be. So if someone is saying that I'm a danger to myself, they're saying it, they're signaling it, pray and call 911. That's what we do. Okay. If someone says I'm not safe with other people, we need to get the appropriate persons involved, right? And that means that we're not silent when we see signs and signals that somebody is unsafe. And whether it's unsafe with themselves, whether it's unsafe towards someone else, or whether someone is perpetrating something on that person, that means that they no longer have psychological or physiological safety, we need to act.
That is really good. The thing that you said about the help-seeking behavior that really stood out to me was I thought about how so many Black parents or family members, teachers, their immediate verbiage is attention-seeking.
Yes.
Excellent.
This person is trying to get attention, and then you are reprimanded because you're seeking attention. And we rarely perceive what's happening as help seeking. And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, what's the difference between having anxiety and being anxious? Because like you're saying, I think a lot of us have been saying, or I've been seeing a lot of people, I have anxiety, I have anxiety, I have anxiety. But what does it really mean, at least from a broad scale? I can receive that it probably manifests on a spectrum, but what are some telltale signs for a person that genuinely has anxiety versus someone who may be periodically anxious?
So one thing I wanted to go back to before I address that question is that not only do we reprimand the person who's identified as attention seeking, a lot of times I have seen in our culture that we also reprimand people who offer assistance to the person who is attention seeking. Yes. Don't go over there and comfort them. They're just seeking attention. They just want attention. Yep. Right. So now even people who are trying to support the person are given the message that, they have to tough it out or they need to stop doing that. And so the cycle is not just between the person who's labeled as attention seeking, but even the persons who may seek to, well, let me go, be with that person and try to assist or bring comfort, are often given the message also that that's the wrong thing to do. So a lot to unpack there. But to your other point about anxiety, to being anxious versus having an anxiety disorder. So being anxious is part of our signal system that is, God-given and built into our physiology, right? So for people who never get anxious, that might be concerning too. Yeah. So most people have experienced that feeling of being anxious, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to do a big speech in front of a big audience, or you're getting ready to propose to the love of your life, or you're getting ready to do a very important test. Those kinds of things cause the butterflies in our stomach, the increased heart rate, or even something that could be scary can be anxiety provoking as well, right? And those things, when you experience them, is your body telling you, look, either we're gonna fight this thing, we're gonna, run away from this thing, or we're gonna endure with the anxiety. We're gonna stay right here and deal with these feelings. And it passes, and it's specifically determined around a certain set of circumstances. Mm-hmm. And those cues that our body gives us, we can cope with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have enough resources to cope with it.
Yeah.
And we get through it. The person who has an anxiety disorder, and you're right, that there are several specific kinds of anxiety disorders, and then there's generalized anxiety disorder. Phobias are also part of this as well. So fears that tax our coping resources, that cause us to be not to be able to go about whatever it is that we're doing. When you have that significant of anxiety response, and it follows a certain pattern and for a certain duration, it's triggered. You go through your whole anxiety phase from the onset to the peak and then down again, but you may stay in that peak longer than others, and it means you can't drive over that bridge, right? You mentioned the example earlier of driving over the bridge, but some people, their trip is going to take them a week because they're plotting it so that they never cross a bridge. Mm-hmm. If they have to travel and cross a bridge, they're not going to go. So right. That person who you're like, man, I always invite them and they never come, mm-hmm. right? They could be avoiding a situation that triggers them, for which they do not have the coping resources to push through. And so in order to deal with that anxiety, that they avoid it altogether. So that's when we talk about disorder, and I don't want people to be afraid of the word disorder, mm-hmm. It's or illness. It's because, mental health issues are so loaded. People don't want to say that they have. I noticed that we don't even say post-traumatic stress disorder. There, people are just saying post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the disorder is silent, So, but we should be
silent. It's not silent.
It's not silent. Right? Or I have anxiety, and which is why it gets conflated and confused. Are you anxious, or do you have an anxiety disorder? Mm-hmm. And I think people shouldn't be afraid of the words disorder and illness, but I understand. So you really want to look at.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So you really want to look at whether or not it meets DSM-5 criteria, and have it assessed and diagnosed so that you can know the difference between, am I just a nervous Nelly, or do I have an anxiety disorder?
Yeah. To that, I was wondering, is procrastination a form of anxiety?
Could be. Could be if it's chronic.
Yeah.
Right. If it's something that interferes with your ability to get to your goals, it could be. It could also be related to other things. People who have ADHD may procrastinate also, and they may not be anxious, but they have difficulty focusing. They are impulsive. And so, to get to that thing that they need to complete, it takes them a bit longer because daydreaming, impulsive, poor planning, poor executive functioning. So procrastination that's chronic and that impacts ability to achieve goals is something that you would want to have properly assessed to understand how it's showing up and why. And if it's part of something that needs to be addressed, what is that thing? So procrastination does show up in a lot of anxiety disorder if it serves the function of avoidance, right? Or it serves the function of that psychological safety that's associated with anxiety symptoms. It may be related to that, but you really want to have it assessed because it could be related to other things as well. The people who are suffering from depression, they may procrastinate too. They just don't have the energy, the cognitive energy or the emotional energy to get it done. And they may be functional. I myself, I had postpartum depression really bad following a euphoric pregnancy. So I was up and then I was really, really down. But I went to work every day, right? And unless you really knew me, you may not have, well, I think maybe it was more apparent than I thought, but unless you really knew me, people weren't saying to me, is everything okay? Because I was getting the job done in the area where I needed my paycheck. But in other areas of my life, after all I dragged myself to work to give that energy, I didn't have the energy to do other things. And so it seemed like I was procrastinating, but it was really a signal of something else going on. So whatever the symptom is, you really want to work with the professional to make sure that you're ascribing it to the right thing. Because just the way we're saying that people may say, oh, that behavior is attention seeking, that procrastination may be labeled something else that it really is not.
Well, the more we talk, it just seems like we all need to go ahead and have that baseline evaluation, because who knows what we're dealing with that you just thought was maybe a character or personality trait, but it could be linked to something else that could be addressed. And I love what you're giving us now. You know, okay, if I can go on the flip side, and I feel almost guilty for, not guilty, but I'm feeling some kind of way about asking this question because I feel like it's going to come across as not politically correct, but I'm going to ask it. So I guess part of me wants to know, so, you know, like I said, I have 3 children and I have young people around me and I have myself that I deal with. And I guess resilience, and I heard you talk about this in something else. It's like, how do I encourage resilience when you're up against something, or if you got a challenge and you feel anxious, and I'm not sure that it's anxiety, but how far do I push, and how far do I say, you can do this. I know this is a challenge, but you can do this. So I'm having a hard time balancing, because we overuse the word in other circumstances, but as a parent, you know, your parents push you. So am I making sense?
I was looking for a rubber band and I cannot find one. But the reason why I was looking for a rubber band is that it's a very if you guys have a rubber band, please feel free to grab one. If those of you who are watching live, if you have a rubber band, get one on the replay, right?
Anybody has a rubber band,
right? So the resilience is very much like that rubber band, right? So a rubber band has but so much give, right? In order for it to retain its integrity. So in order for us to deal with whatever we're dealing with, and remember, this changes all the time. You know, I can be resilient about one thing in one area of my life, and in something else, you know, God help us. And I could have been resilient about it when I was 20 and unafraid, or when I watched my 3.5-year-old, the things he is not afraid of. He can handle that. Just watching him do, I'm like, you know, whoa.
Yeah.
Right? Because as we get older, we become more afraid because we're more aware of what can happen. So then we have to learn to deal with that thing. But that rubber band, right? So it has but so much built-in give, right? That allows it to maintain its integrity. And if stretched beyond that, it may be able to stretch, right? But then when the situation is over, it would have lost its integrity by being stretched beyond what it should have been, and then lose some of that elastic or gain more elasticity and less
Resistance.
right? And then, you may be in a situation, imagine that rubber band, and you tried to give a little more, and guess what?
Pop.
That rubber band popped, right? So resilience is a lot like that, right? How to be able to deal with what you're dealing with in a way that maintains your emotional, psychological, behavioral integrity, right? Because you need that. You need that, to be able to drive on these streets and not be constantly concerned that you're going to get pulled over by a police officer and this is your last day, right? So you need that in order to be able to move away from home and go away to college and not have that, parent waking you up to get to wherever you're getting to on time and making sure that you're accomplishing your goals, while at the same time being able to be social and enjoy your college experience. You need that resilience and you need to be stretched, right? Life is going to stretch you in different ways. So you want to be able to think about, what is it fundamentally as a parent that I can provide to my children that will help them to be able to be pulled and stretched, but to maintain that psychological, emotional, behavioral integrity? And then what is it that I, as a parent, can provide for my young person that if they're stretched beyond that, right, that they know where to go to get the resources that they need to be able to persevere. So for anyone who has that concern for young people in terms of what we can instill, and then for you to have your own resilience, to know that there are some things they have to go through on their own in order for that resilience to be built, right? We can't protect them against everything, but we can give them the foundational building blocks and continue to be that support so that as they go through their own thing, as they, date that person who you knew was going to break their heart.
Come on now.
Know that they will not die. I remember my very first real heartbreak, and I was in the bed in a just pool of tears. And I remember my mother said to me, "You're not going to die."
She needed to tell you.
Yes.
It felt like that.
And at the time I was like, no, I think I'm dying.
Pretty sure.
Really feel like this is death. And she was like, "You're not gonna die," and just I had to get through it on my own and build a new resilience, right? But that support to know that my mother was going to be there with me as I went through what I had to go through myself and what she couldn't go through for me. That helps to build resilience as well.
That's so good. But I want to ask another question, like following up to that, but it's 11:59. You have things.
Look at the time.
And so I
just
just
have
want
to keep the tape rolling and do some bonus material. Who knows?
I know, right? Listen, man, it was such a pleasure to have you this morning, Dr. Denham-Wilks. I mean, this has just been so eye-opening. I mean, we have just covered just the gambit in the last hour. And so, our prayer and our encouragement to you that are watching is that, this is an introduction that gets you into the mental health care that you need. I like to give our guests the final word. What is kind of the overall takeaway or a final word of hope or of inspiration that you would like to leave our viewers with on this topic of mental health?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you again for this opportunity. And I really also just enjoyed having this discussion. What you're doing is so necessary and vital for our community. And so I thank you for this opportunity. And I would say to people that one of the things that is, if you don't remember anything else, is that your value in Christ is irreducible, no matter who you are, what you've gone through, what you've experienced, and that your value is real, and it should be something that that you treasure and that others around you respect. And so, if you need that additional help to make sure that you are in full full control of that idea and that belief, and that belief empowers your life, then I absolutely recommend that you get the help that you need. And I wish for your health, your well-being, and your safety.
And that's so great. How can people follow you, support you out here in these social media streets?
So if you search my name, you will find me on all social platforms. Well, not all. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So my name is here, Seanna-Kaye Wilks, and you can follow me there. I do also have a private practice, and so I'm on ZocDoc.com as well, for people to go through that platform for referral.
Mhm.
Awesome. Everyone, I pray that you were blessed by this conversation. As always, we try to bring you information. We try to bring you inspiration. And this is, such a really great conversation, particularly given the issue that we've just previously had, as well as the issue that is out right now. You're talking about needing to change your mind, we are talking about toxic faith, you're talking about things that you can't always do by yourself or just do with your pastor or favorite preacher. Some of this stuff, when it comes to changing your mind and dealing with toxic faith, you've got to speak with a professional about it. So make sure that you either download our digital magazine or get a print issue so that you can really read some powerful articles around these topics from professionals, from practitioners, as well as spiritual leaders and theologians, so that you can just continue to grow into a better version of yourself. That's what we want to do here at Message, is give you the resources that you need, the information and the inspiration that you need to grow into the fullness of what God has for you. So make sure that you visit our website at www.messagemagazine.com. Get your subscription of the magazine today. Make sure that you give us your email. That's how you can receive our weekly newsletter. And then, of course, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. All right. The YouTube channel has every single one of the What's the Message podcast episodes, as well as our Liberation Library episodes and a variety of other video-based content that you do not want to miss. So like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Message1898, and keep up with the message that we share here. It's always a pleasure. Until next Thursday, we will see you then. Same time, same place, only a much different conversation. Be blessed.